It's hard to keep up with how fast events are moving on the ground in Syria. The historic fall of Bashar al-Assad over the weekend shocked a lot of people. Assad is reportedly in Russia. Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, the leader of the main Syrian rebel group, the Islamist group HTS, is reportedly in Damascus. He's already appointed a new prime minister for the country, apparently. A lot going on in Syria, prisons being opened up. But where does Syria go next, and what role can the international community play? I'm delighted to say that I'm joined now from Geneva by the United Nations Secretary General's Special Envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen. Thank you so much for joining us on Mehdi Unfiltered. Appreciate you taking time out of a very busy week, I know, for you.
No, really a pleasure being here and to be able to talk to you. And as you rightly began by stating, it's been a historical change the last few days. And what happened yesterday, I think it was yesterday, Sunday.
Yes.
No one really believed it could happen. That we would see an end to this way. Really unbelievable to see and to watch.
So let me ask you on that note, that very question. How stunned were you as the UN Special Envoy for Syria, not just to see Assad fall in that way late Saturday night, but also this entire 11-day offensive by the rebels taking over the entire country in less than 2 weeks? How stunned, how shocked were you and your team?
We were all stunned. We were, frankly speaking, we were all surprised. But in all fairness, we were not the only one. I think all were surprised. And I actually believe that also HTS were surprised that it was possible to go from Idlib and in a few days take Aleppo, take Hama, then go to Homs, and then to Damascus. And that you then would see that they were joined by the Syrian National Army after Aleppo. And then, of course, we saw the Free Syrian Army, as they call themselves, going in and taking over Damascus first, and then later joined by HTS. I think the important thing here, if I may say, is that this happened because the Syrian regime at the time were not willing to engage in a real political discussion with the opposition. They had the opportunity during 13 years to sit down and do a real discussion, and they refused serious engagement. And then, of course, you had on top of it the economic collapse that was become even stronger after the earthquake last year. And the fact that then the Arabs normalized relationship didn't help that. The situation got even worse.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he didn't listen to the advice from the Arabs, and he was not even willing to sit down and discuss with Erdogan. So, in short, everyone was upset.
Yes. You mentioned HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is the main Islamist group, some might argue jihadist group, an offshoot of al-Qaeda in Syria, Jabhat al-Nusra, the Nusra Front. Interestingly, the UN's approach, your approach to Syria is based, I believe, on UN Security Council Resolution 2254, which was passed unanimously by the Security Council almost a decade ago. That resolution makes it very clear, explicitly clear, that the Nusra Front, the al-Qaeda franchise in Syria, should be excluded from any ceasefire, any political process. And yet the man now effectively in charge of Syria, Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, is the former leader of the Nusra Front. His group, HTS, is basically an offshoot of the Nusra Front. So where does that leave the UN's approach?
This creates, obviously, challenges. And I've been very open when it comes to this. But we have to be very precise, and we have to be factual. It is now 9 years since this resolution was passed, and of course there's been a lot of changes. And what we have been seeing, and this is extremely important, what we've been seeing from the HTS on the ground has been, I think, surprising to most people. The messaging coming out so far has been good. What we have seen in Aleppo, there are problems, there are challenges, but at least there is an invitation to all communities in Syria, and that no one should be excluded. What we now need to see when they are in Damascus, and of course they're not alone in Damascus, is that this vision is actually implemented.
Yes.
And I do believe that if that vision is implemented, the new reality will be speaking for itself. And then I do believe, if I may just say this, is that then, of course, the sanctioning states and those in the UN that are dealing with this, we see that there is a new realities, but only if there is a real change happening on the ground.
Do you believe, it sounds like you're willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. You're saying the messaging sounds good. You are the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for Syria. Will you be advising the UN Secretary General and the Security Council that they should perhaps unlist, delist, no longer prescribe Nusra or HTS or Julani as terrorist entities? The UK government, apparently today, the BBC is reporting that the UK government is considering delisting him and his group as a terrorist group.
As I said, we need to see the proof. We need to see that the actions are actually followed up. As I said, we have seen good statements. We have seen some good developments on the ground. We now need to see that when we move forward, that there is actually a transitional body established in Damascus that is inclusive of all communities and is not dominated by one armed group, but include all of them. And if that happens, then my message to the Security Council will be, yes, it's time to have a deeper look at this and see if it's possible to delist. But as I said, only if these things happen.
You mentioned what's happening in Damascus with all the internal groups. Let's talk about the outside actors. Syria has been plagued by outside interventions, military interventions by its neighbors, by other countries in the region. You, I believe, were in Doha at the weekend at the Doha Forum, meeting with a lot of the foreign ministers and representatives for a lot of these countries. What is your message to those countries, to Turkey, to Iran? Turkey basically controls now a large chunk of Syrian territory. What's your message to them?
My message to the three you mentioned, but also to the Arab ministers that were there from Saudi Arabia, from Egypt, from Jordan, and from Iraq, and obviously the Qataris, was exactly the same. And that is what we now need is to see de-escalation, because it's important to remember the conflict is not over. We have a large part of the country, mostly where Alawites are living, mostly, not only, that is not under the control of any of the armed groups. We have the situation in the northeast, controlled by the SDF, supported by the Americans. So this is one thing. And then, of course, we have the potential clash between the different groups, and we really have to avoid that. So my message is de-escalation, calm. And then my second message is, as I've already have mentioned, that we need to see transitional arrangement in Damascus that is reassuring to all the millions of Syrians that are now hoping for a new future that is not dominated by one group, not by one person, but where all Syrians have a say. And I'm very pleased to be able to say, if I may just one more word on that, I'm very pleased to say it was unanimous support for this from all the ministers that I talked to in Doha.
The Russians too?
The Russians too, absolutely.
What about Israel? What is the UN's message to Israel, which not only continues to occupy the Syrian Golan Heights, but since Saturday has been seizing new territory in the buffer zone where UN peacekeepers are based, and has been bombing Damascus? They're bombing what they say are chemical weapon sites for the last couple of days too. What's your message to Israel?
The message to Israel is that this needs to stop. What we're seeing in the Golan is a violation of the 1974 agreement. This is a very serious issue.
Netanyahu says the agreement is dead. Is he wrong?
Of course, it's not dead. There is a government in place in Damascus. They are, of course, bound by previous agreements. They have not stated anything that could even give an indication that they do not respect these agreements. So let's not start playing with an extremely important part of the peace structure that has been in place.
What do you say, Geir Pedersen, to your Syrian critics in the opposition who say, we had to do this on our own? The UN failed us for the past 14 years. We had to do it alone. Or worse, they say, the UN was complicit with the Assad regime against us. What do you say to those critics?
To the first part of the question, I would say, I fully understand. Let's be honest. We all failed the Syrian people. And the United Nations, for many, will be the face of that. And we have to take responsibility for that. But I think the important thing is that the resolution that you mentioned at the very beginning, UN Security Council Resolution 2254, the message is exactly this, that this is the responsibility of the Syrian people, but it also needs the support of the international community. And why does it need the support of the international community? Hopefully to be able to help in the transitional phase, but also to help with humanitarian assistance, to make sure that we can work towards the lifting of sanctions, to see that we will have economic recovery and rebuilding, to help with the return of refugees and IDPs to their homes, to internally displaced to their homes, and to help with the file of detainees that have been released from prison and the whole file of justice and
Yes.
accountability.
What about the second part, the complicity question? The UN is seen as complicit with the Assad regime.
Thanks. Frankly speaking, I think that is absolutely untrue. Absolutely untrue. We have been very clear. The mandate we have been following very, 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 very carefully.
Geir Pedersen, you are, last question, I know you're very busy. My last question to you is this. You are, I think, the 4th UN Special Envoy on Syria since 2011, since the Arab Spring began. You've been in the job 6 years now. Are you hopeful about the future of Syria? Is this the first time you're allowing yourself to be hopeful about the future of Syria?
Yes, I am hopeful, but with the important caveat that this is not over. If the Syrians themselves follow what I've been mentioning just now to you, if the international community rallies behind this, there is a unique opportunity that we could see a new Syria developing now in the next days, weeks, months, and years ahead of us. But it is not over.
No, it isn't. But we appreciate you taking time out to speak to us while it's still ongoing. Geir Pedersen from the United Nations, thank you so much for appearing on Mehdi Unfiltered.
My pleasure.
Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to Zeteo.com. Your support matters.